Hello, I'm Chris Blask, the Vice President of Strategy with Cybeats. I'm on Sam Clemens and Mark Twain in Melbourne Harbor, Melbourne, Florida now, as of this morning, after 600 kilometers of sailing these crazy boats across the ocean. And with me today is one of my greatest friends, my favorite people in the entire world, Bill McGee. Bill, where the hell are you and how are you doing? And good to see you.
Good. Yeah, I just got back from a week in the mountains here. I live in Alpine, Utah, which is not on the road to anywhere. About an hour south of Salt Lake, but right up against the mountains. So I live in this little bowl with mountains on three sides of me and a national forest right here. And so it's pretty nice.
And I remember once upon a time back in the 1990s, you talked me into moving there. And surprisingly, of all the places, I've foisted on Donna, my wife, it's one of the great places on earth. It really is. Just fantastic weather. The people are great. And you can hike up in American Fork Canyon and, make it back to do Zoom calls. So
Right.
it's a good spot. So as we discussed, right. So on this show, this is episode 27. I think I'm supposed to say that. And on this show, we have a panel looking back, looking at where we are right now and trying to look in the future. And since, supply chain security is what we're all about, for a living now, and you and I have been working together from the early firewall days, I'm thinking it might be pushing right about 30 years now, 30 years. And, a lot of this has been about transparency, honesty, clarity, open source, the internet, who's going to run it? Nobody, right? How does that actually work? But here we are today, right? And the entire world, the structure of the world is built on literally, structurally built on this concept that information flows and people make choices and we're all reasonable and we work through things. And, back in the 1940s, your dad, was involved in World War II. And as I recall, sort of walked across to the Saving Private Ryan tour of Europe, right? Because at that point we were having this big debate, globally on whether, basically people need to be controlled, we need authoritarian states, or whether this, idea that, transparency and honesty, applied to all of us, populations and countries and nations and business systems and so forth is better and will maintain itself. So it has me thinking, in your case, looking back, with your history, with your family history, with what I know about you, all the way, right? So to the point of that first question, if you're rolling that, Anthony. So what do you take this anywhere you want, but with that frame, what does, your dad's history and that era you came from and grew up with, say to you about this whole thing and honesty and transparency?
Well, I think that we get in the situations we got into then and now largely because of a lack of honesty and transparency, right? That's the problem, is that people are fed misinformation, decisions are made based on misinformation, ulterior motives are hidden, objectives are obscured, and then you have people either who buy into that or who don't. And that's usually where the conflict comes from. I mean, once you get into the middle of a battle, I was just thinking about this earlier today, is that, honesty becomes a bit ambiguous once you're in the war, except for the objective, right? The objective is to get past, basically eradicate this thing that ends up causing people a lot of problems. You and I spend a lot of time doing this when you sit down with a customer and you talk to them. It's very quickly being able to determine, okay, here's where you are now. Where does that put you in 5 years? Right? And you look down the road and you go, okay, this is not a good place to be. This direction we're headed, not a good place. And a lot of people seem to struggle with that. But that seems to be the business we're in, right? That to be successful in this space, you really have to see where that's going, and that needs to apply, across the board with, politics or science or any of those fields that impact our lives. It's this being able to go 1 + 1 = 5, and being accurate about it.
Well, yeah, in the the time, people have to know, Bill is listed as brother on Facebook to me, right? We've got, Bill was the marketing heart of one of the first two borderware firewall resellers in the early 1990s, and it was just burned up the world, right? Because at that point, firewalls were, you had to get on the internet. You need a firewall to be on the internet sanely as a business. And if you don't want to do that, that's fine. Your competitors will, and they'll put you out of business, right?
Right.
And then we worked together at Cisco, built that big firewall monstrosity at the turn of the century. And yeah, the whole issue. You look at that span of time, open source, the internet. When we met, we started working together. I remember a clip that Bill Gates, I'm sure, would like to not be seen, but I know it's out there somewhere, where he's giving a talk. It has happened randomly channel surfing back in the days we had channels. And he was saying, no one will ever use the internet, but the Microsoft network will be this, now one look, no one will ever use the internet. Well, not this completely unstructured thing that just people will, they'll just get together and agree to terms and standards and so forth, and it'll just work. No, we have to have a big controlling body run it. But here we are, right?
Mm-hmm.
This internet thing we've all been building is the most important thing on earth, right? How would research happen today without the internet? How would medical research, we're in the, have global pandemic going on, right? How would we have responded to that if you had to, like when you and I first met? I remember talking to the Canadian Cancer Society, the first internet connection I sold, and as the person was driving over, and they just needed an argument to spend $1,000 a month for internet connection, and the web wasn't a thing then, but Gopher was. So as she was driving over, had 15 minutes, half an hour or something, and I said, I don't know, search for cancer, long list, pick one. And then she showed up, and I said, well, normally I would expect that, what happens in your world is that, somebody contacts, knows, they show up at work, they drive in, they walk in, sit in their office, they know somehow that the University of Minnesota has a research paper on a certain type of leukemia, and which, they're also working on. So they'll send a request, send a fax or something like that. And, maybe next week they'll get an envelope, with the research paper. Is that about right? Yes. So would it change your world if they could do this? And I sat down and in much less time than it took to tell this story, I said, click, print, and printed, a paper from the University of Minnesota on a certain type of leukemia, that week. Right. She's like, oh yeah, that'll do it. That saves, as we know today, it saves you 99.9% of the time and cost. Right.
Absolutely.
More than that. And it's emergent properties happen. It's not that you can do it faster. It's that the world works in different ways. And it's because this, hairy hippie, open source, free speech, internet, self-governing thing actually worked, despite the cynicism of the time.
Yeah,
so looking
yeah.
at Anthony, right, yeah.
The challenge you have is that if you can have access to all the information ever produced at your fingertips all the time, any movie, every song ever written, every book ever published, every report ever done, it's all at your fingertips all the time. That sounds like utopia, right? It sounds like we should be able to get everything. But what we didn't expect was that this space was also going to be filled with an enormous amount of bad information and cat videos. And it makes it very difficult now for someone who is going through the process of consuming information or trying to learn something to differentiate between good and bad. There's a basic skill set that we're not providing most people, which is how to tell the difference between good information and bad information, how to parse through. They just don't have the skill to parse information and say, here are the markers you look for in order to intuitively understand this is trustworthy information, this is not trustworthy information. And that's really the crux of the problem we're facing right now, is that basic kind of classical educational skill set has been it's been eroded, and perhaps intentionally. I mean, I don't want to get into conspiracy stuff because but I think that there's been a kind of a movement to sort of eliminate that sort of education, because there's this sense that, why do you need it? Because all the information is just going to be handed to you.
Well, we're hackers, right? We understand that there's also actors take advantage of opportunities, right? And the information in throughout cybersecurity, the opportunity has been that, hey, look, I can break this. And it's like, hey, look, I can break this, make money. Hey, look, I can break this and make a lot of money, or influence nation state actions, or so on and so forth, and it's followed that path. So
Right.
every time there's an open space, as you say, we've created this information system that will deliver all the information. But we live in a post-Xanadu world, right? Samuel Coleridge, the author, is said to be the last person who read every written word, every published word in the English language. Since then, there's too much. Can't be done. You cannot read it all. And we live today in a world where, it makes sense if you think about it. There's too much. There's more information than you can possibly process. And we have, as you say, no real structure writ large. And even in cybersecurity, we're getting a little better at it. And it's the whole supply chain thing. We're getting a little better at it, to the point that companies start up and sponsor shows like this so we can talk about it. And so we have to either find a way to parse through this in a world where there's more and more and more information, or we can't ever. Right. And this is where I get into my inevitability curves. Right. So if we're saying we can't solve this, then we mean 1,000 years, 1,000,000 years from now, human culture will still be stuck with this idea that nobody knows what's true or not. I don't think that's
Right.
true.
No,
And
no.
I see signs in what you and I have been doing all our lives, all our careers. It's going on right now. So, Anthony, what was that second question? I'm sure it was really good, and I just said it the other day. So, what needs to be true today, right? And again, take it any direction you want, but if you're going to, you work at Fortinet, people can look up, the guests. We don't get into all that, but you're the director of communications at Fortinet, infrastructure and security stuff and so forth, and threat intelligence and all this wonderful, whatever, right? But today we live in this world where there's, so software bill of materials, right? Who's going to write these? How do you identify them? What do the names work? What needs to be actually true? And shout outs to people who've been on the show, and friends and people that are doing great work in this. But Tom Ulrich, has been working on a group that had a call today, earlier today, and the naming issue, right? But a lot of it comes down to how true it needs to be. If you're going to say you are, this is this product, and your S-bombs or whatnot, how true does that need to be to me on the granular level that we're all obsessing with? And to get me off my soapbox, writ large, right? What needs to be true today?
Everything what's always needed to be true is the information we use on which we base decisions, right? And so one of the biggest challenges historically, it's been a small subset of those, right? I put these seeds in the ground. What's true is that in a certain amount of time, if I do these certain things, I will have something to eat. And if I do these certain things at this certain time of year, I will have these certain kind of outcome. The animals graze through this area, and I know if I'm there at a certain amount of time, within a week or two, elk are going to come through, and I'll be able to harvest enough meat to get through the winter. Right? That's very basic sorts of stuff that we need to be true today, because we're kind of an information-rich, information-led society. Even people who aren't in the information industry, we use lots of information to make all of our decisions. What shoes did I buy, and what do I, there's not a lot of see your pants sort of decision making going on. And everybody who has a vested interest in you making a decision in their direction is going to try and sway you with their version of what's true about this, right? And that usually involves either fudging what this does, or intentionally leaving out things that you, and so it becomes increasingly difficult to get the information you need to make good decisions, especially if you are trapped in a cognitive dissonant confirmation bias vortex where nothing is true that doesn't fit inside the box that you've already created for yourself to live in.
Well, and this is one of the reasons, you know how much I love conflict, right? And I don't just mean interpersonal conflict, but just situations where you just have to make choices and live with them. And it's one of the reasons I've always loved boats, right? Because you get presented with lots of opportunities when, yes, you can do 12 things, but you need to pick one of them right now, and you need to live with it and move on. And that last question, I like making these up because you think about it, so does Gandalf win? Right? Anybody who knows the Lord of the Rings, and if you're watching this and you don't know the Lord of the Rings, do they still make you? I don't know. But Gandalf and the Balrog, the whole Gandalf story. Gandalf the Grey turns into Gandalf the White, right? It's all about being thoughtful and artful and appropriately, honestly transparent, right? I love these. I love the cycle we're in right now, from threat intelligence and the ice axe to this right now. It's like, does that mean I have to tell everybody everything and give away all my intellectual property to all? But no, shut up, right? No, what we're talking about in honesty and transparency and so forth is given our responsibilities and our relationships, transmitting the right information, appropriately and clearly and, and honestly and truthfully. At Cybeats, we went through a big marketing exercise last year and came up with, software made certain. And I find it fascinating that when you have a good marketing company do a lot of research, you find that certainty has not been used as a phrase in cybersecurity marketing much at all, because it raises these questions. So how certain of what? But I think we're at this point where we're talking about how certain do you need to be? How true does this need to be for you? Right? And it may be, again, yeah.
Guys, this parallels a conversation we've had several times about, is the future the Star Wars future or the Star Trek future, right? Because the Star Trek future is based on trust. The Federation, everybody is moving towards the same objective, and they've eliminated things like poverty and the need and want and all of those things. Everybody has something to do, and everybody's very anxiously engaged in doing something and moving the needle forward. And it's a society that's based on a common ground of what we can believe and trust. Star Wars is the dystopian future, right? Where same technology, sort of, but it's the every man for himself sort of a thing. And the whole empire operates on distrust and misinformation. And, and so those are our two futures, right? And we really at a point right now where we get to pick which sort of a future we embrace based on the integrity of the information that we have available to us and the ability to get people past where we're at right now. Right now, I'm seeing a Star Wars future, right? Because we've just created these camps of entrenched thinking based on marginally reliable information that's provided by people with ulterior motives, and that makes it very difficult to move forward. I think the Star Trek future is possible, but we have to make some changes. And one of you said we have to be able to say this information is trustworthy and this information is not. We've got to figure out how to solve that problem. We've got to be able to say these objectives move us forward as a society, and that's a value that we all embrace, as opposed to I'm going to undercut you so I can get my bigger piece of the pie.
Well, as you know, I'm optimistic. I worry about the Star Trek future. It's certainly on the plate, but I see the benefits. The benefits of transparency, honesty, democracy, capitalism, and so forth. These things where we had to be honest about our relationships. You look at the mechanisms at play right now in cybersecurity and business. In business, as our the third musketeer of the three of us, Stu Phillips, will always say, if you have more money, you win. If you can be more profitable, than your competitors, you will in the end buy them or put them out of business. And that's just the way it is. It's a numbers game. So you have to be clear. And again, if corruption is better than real business, then maybe that's the best way to make money. But historically, through our lives, better, more efficient, faster business makes more money, and you can influence the world. And in cybersecurity, and it's supply chain, right? And it has to, as I say, right now we're all working through how certain you need to be. And the answer is it's not, 100%. Now you can get 99 point, a lot of nines if you need to. You're going to send something to the moon. You're going to do various things. You can put a lot of into a lot of things, but you have to decide how much you need and engineer that so you can have it, or you can't run your systems. You can't go to the moon. You cannot actually do any of these things. And that's, I
Yeah,
think,
there's no room for ruthlessness in math,
right.
right? If I'm calculating how to land on the moon at a particular place, my personal objectives and ruthlessness is not going to solve that problem, right? It gets in the way. And so we have to decide how much of that is tolerable in our society and our business interactions and stuff like that, because I don't think we're going to eliminate it entirely. It's just part of the process. But there's a place where it may be more than is
Affordable.
reasonable for the outcome we want.
Right. I think we may be, and I think we are, but again, I'm aware that I'm too optimistic. I think too much of the Star Trek future is not guaranteed, but I can't see a way for us to engineer these systems to share information, and be really clear and really transparent about it, to even run our infrastructures and so forth, that don't also apply to everything else, that don't also make those who adopt those, mechanically transparent and honest, appropriately defined, transparency and honesty and clarity will outcompete the rest. So
we've got to get it right now. We've got to get it right now, because everything's converging. We're at this point where all these systems that work really well individually, to keep your car on the road or to keep the electricity, these things are all converging. They're all converging together. And the bad bit of information in the middle of that can have a massive impact versus if these things are isolated systems. And so in that process of convergence, we have really got to nail down the reliability issue, because if we get it wrong, then the ambulance doesn't get to your house, right? The house burns down before the fire truck gets there, right? Because all of traffic got redirected in the wrong direction, or something, right? And that's really the trick of it, is that in that Star Trek future, all this stuff just works together, right? These things are universally compatible. And in the Star Wars future, everything's cobbled together with, spit and baling wire. And so, and there's always a certain amount of that, right? That's going to exist. But this is right now when we've got to nail this down quickly, because these things are going to converge. And if they're converged using bad information, we're going to have bad outcomes.
I couldn't think of a better way to wrap it. I could go on forever with you. And, as I said in the green room before this, can't wait to get you on the boat, someday, and see you and the family together. Love that woman for me. Take care of those kids. You're a great person. Thanks for everything you do for the world, much less just being a good friend.
Thanks, Chris. Anytime. I'm looking forward to getting back together with you in person.
Yay. Thanks, folks. Take care.
You're welcome.